Electoral bonds, as most of you would know, were a form of bearer bonds, anonymous bearer bonds that were introduced by this government by the Finance Act of 2017. The scheme was operationalized in early 2018, and the idea was that there would be these bearer bonds which would have a face value of 1,000 rupees to 1 crore rupees, which would have no name. They would be like currency notes. They could be purchased by anybody from designated branches of State Bank of India, and they could be given to any political party who could encash them. The whole object of the scheme was laid out by Mr. Arun Jaitley. When he introduced the scheme, he said that the reason why we are introducing these anonymous electoral bonds is because if companies give open funding to political parties, then they fear that they will be victimized by the ruling party if they are funding opposition parties. Therefore, we need these anonymous electoral bonds. Now, the fallacy in this was that every bond had a unique alphanumeric number which could be seen by anyone with an ultraviolet light. And the State Bank of India, which was issuing these bonds, was recording the bond numbers sold to people and the bond numbers redeemed by the political parties. Therefore, the State Bank of India could always track who has purchased this bond and given it to which party. And because State Bank of India is under the Government of India, therefore, even the Government of India could know. Therefore, the ruling party in any case could know who these bonds, who is purchasing the bonds and giving it to which party. It is only the people and the opposition parties and the Election Commission who didn't know, who were not given this information. So for all others, they were anonymous, but for the State Bank and for the government, they knew who had purchased these bonds and given it to whom. Now, the Prime Minister gave another justification. He said that we want to reduce cash in political funding, and therefore because these bonds can only be purchased through the banks, therefore it will reduce or eliminate political funding through cash. We know that that is false because firstly, cash political funding is still going on, was still going on, continued to go on, as is clear from the amount of cash that is recovered during elections by various raids, etc., from various people, including candidates, etc., and political parties. So, there was never any restriction on undisclosed cash being used by political parties. Even disclosed cash, you see, the earlier rule was that if you are given a donation of less than 20,000, you need not disclose who has given this money to you. Therefore, many political parties used to disclose 1,000 crores, 1,500 crores and say that these are petty cash donations of less than 20,000 rupees. That limit was reduced from 20,000 to 2,000 when this electoral bond scheme was introduced. But that didn't change anything because political parties could still take unaccounted cash, and political parties could also take accounted cash by just saying that we have received this 1,000, 2,000 crores by way of petty cash donations below 2,000 each. Therefore, that justification doesn't hold water either. Now, we challenge the electoral bond scheme on three grounds. One, that this violates the citizens' right to know who is funding which political party. That's a fundamental right of citizens. Second, that this will promote kickbacks being given by companies to political parties who control various governments, which governments are in a position to give favors to these companies. And therefore it will increase corruption. Third, we said that this will destroy the level playing field between political parties because all the bonds will go to ruling parties, basically as quid pro quo, as kickbacks, and those parties which are not ruling in either the center or at the states will not receive any money through electoral bonds. Supreme Court, after 6 years, unfortunately they decided the case after 6 years. During these 6 years, about 6,500 crores of electoral bonds were purchased and encashed by political parties, out of which 50% went to the BJP alone, and the remaining 50% went to those state political parties which were in control of state governments. Virtually nothing went to other political parties who were not controlling state governments. Only one party, that is the CPM, which was controlling a state government, decided on principle not to take electoral bonds, and they challenged the scheme in the Supreme Court also. Now, when the Supreme Court finally decided in February this year, they held the bond scheme to be unconstitutional on all the grounds which we had argued. They also declared that the law which was amended to permit companies to donate unlimited amounts to political parties, because earlier the law was that no company could donate more than 7.5% of their profits to political parties. That law was amended to remove this limit altogether. Therefore, even loss-making companies could donate to political parties. They could donate more than their annual profits also. That amendment was also struck down by the Supreme Court. And fortunately for us, they also ordered the State Bank to disclose all the electoral bond details of all the electoral bonds that had been purchased and encashed. And they ordered the State Bank to disclose the details within 3 weeks. At the end of 3 weeks, State Bank filed an application in the Supreme Court saying that we need another 3.5 months till end of June, after the elections, for us to disclose these details. Supreme Court said nothing doing, you disclose it by tomorrow. They disclosed the details the next day. But they still did not disclose the bond numbers. They disclosed who had purchased the electoral bonds, of how much on what date, and who had deposited, which political parties had deposited on what date. But you could not match as to which bond has been purchased by which company and given to which party, because they didn't disclose the bond numbers. So the Supreme Court asked them to disclose the bond numbers, and eventually within 2 days they had to disclose the bond numbers, and thereafter the matching was done within 2 days, within 2 minutes, by various computer experts who could put all the bond numbers on one side, all the bond numbers on the other side, and match them. And when these details came out, and when some journalists did some investigation about the background of these companies, what these companies had been doing, whether they got any contracts, whether any policies were changed to favor these companies who had given these bonds to those political parties, whether these companies were selling substandard drugs, and after they gave the bonds they were still allowed to sell substandard drugs, etc. What came out is very, very alarming, although it was not unexpected. We expected this kind of thing, and this is exactly what came out. That the vast majority of the bonds were given by companies by way of kickbacks and bribes to those political parties which controlled the governments, which were in a position to give some favor to those companies. Now, favors that have been given to the companies which gave these electoral bonds are of various kinds. It has now come out that a lot of the companies who gave electoral bonds were given contracts, and when people think of this figure of 16,500 crores worth of bonds, they don't realize that if the amount of contracts that have been influenced by these bonds is 100 times the value of the bonds. So, for example, when this mega engineering company, which gave 140 crores of electoral bonds in April last year to the BJP, received a contract worth 14,000 crores for one tunnel from the BJP government in Maharashtra. Therefore, the bond value was only 1% of the value of the contract that they received. Similarly, other companies who gave bonds received favorable policy changes in their favor. For example, there is a company, Bharti Telecom, which gave bonds worth 100 odd crores to the BJP, and the policy for allocation of satellite spectrum was changed from auction to allocation, and it was allocated to a company which is owned by Bharti Telecom. Similarly, Grasim Industries also got favorable policy change by way of import policy, and they also gave 100 crores or an odd worth of bonds to the BJP. But even more alarming than this, a number of pharmaceutical companies gave bonds worth hundreds of crores to the BJP, and these companies were facing action from the drug controller for life-threatening medicines that they were manufacturing or substandard medicines that they were manufacturing. And after they gave those bonds, it seems that the drug controller allowed these companies to sell those drugs, to continue to sell those drugs. For example, I'll give you one example, remdesivir. Absolutely lethal drug which was unleashed during COVID. It has killed lakhs of people in India, lakhs of people outside India, documented. It was well known that this is a lethal drug. It was being sold during COVID and the government was promoting it. It was being sold during COVID for tens of thousands of rupees per dose. That company, Zydus Cadila, made hundreds of crores of profits by selling this remdesivir in India. Thousands of crores. And yet this drug was allowed to be continued because this Zydus Cadila company gave hundreds of crores to the BJP by way of electoral bonds. And this is a pattern which is repeated. Not one, not two, not three. Dozens of pharmaceutical companies who gave electoral bonds to allow their substandard, life-threatening drugs to go on. So this government allowed lakhs of people in this country to be killed by these lethal substandard drugs in order to take these bribes by way of electoral bonds. And not just this. There are large number of companies who were facing regulatory action by the Enforcement Directorate, Income Tax and CBI. They were facing raids. They were facing notices and other regulatory action from these enforcement agencies. They also bought electoral bonds and gave it to the BJP, and thereafter these agencies seem to have withdrawn their hands from these companies. So therefore, maybe lakhs of crores of taxes and other things were due, money laundering was due from these companies. All that was stopped, that action was stopped because those companies gave electoral bonds to the ruling party. And it is not just the BJP who has received these. The TMC, for example, there is one company, IFB Agro, which has reported in their own report that we gave 40 crores of bonds to the TMC because the government told us to do so because we were facing some action for some excise issues. So it's clear that most of these electoral bonds were being given by way of bribes for various favors. And the favors could be of all kinds, as I mentioned. And that is why, you see, now this exposure has come, which kind of strongly indicates that these bonds were given by way of bribes. But we still need a criminal investigation in order to identify who are the individuals of that company who were involved in this conspiracy to bribe, who were the individuals of the party who were involved in this conspiracy to take bribes on behalf of the party so that the government which they control could give favors to that company, who were the individuals in the government who were involved in this conspiracy, and who were the individuals in the ED, IT, CBI, etc. who were involved in this conspiracy. So we need, and therefore this investigation would have to be done by a special investigating team which has to be outside the CBI, ED, etc. because even the CBI, ED, etc. would need to be investigated. Their officers would need to be investigated. So we have filed a petition in the Supreme Court. Hopefully it will come up for hearing soon, asking for an SIT investigation of some retired CBI or other officers headed by some retired Supreme Court judge. And if it is found that as it appears to be the case that this money has been paid by way of bribes, then this money has to be recovered from the political parties. Because this is proceeds of crime. You see, some people ask me, once the Supreme Court declared the bonds to be illegal, why is the money not being recovered from the political parties? The answer is that political funding was not illegal. Only anonymous political funding has been declared to be illegal. Of course, bribes, political funding by way of bribes is thoroughly illegal. And therefore, if it is found that companies have paid this money by way of electoral bonds, by way of bribes, then of course that money will have to be disgorged from the political parties. So we have asked for that also. But this shows us the whole rot in our political funding. You see, if we wanted, just see one aspect of the matter, that is the imbalance between limits on individual candidates to spend money in elections. The limit is 75 lakhs per Lok Sabha candidate. So if the BJP were to put up 500 candidates for Lok Sabha, they can spend maximum 400 crores through these candidates for these 500 seats. But the BJP alone, through electoral bonds alone, in the last 6 years has received funding of 8,200 plus crores. That is 40 times the limit of individual candidates. And that is only half the money that the BJP has received. Another equal amount has been received by them through electoral trusts, which is also a semi-anonymous way of funding. Electoral trusts are also a problem. But they have also received through cash, they have also received through direct corporate donations, etc. So therefore, they receive 80 times of what their candidates can spend in totality. Therefore, it makes a mockery of the limit on spending of individual candidates. So therefore, if we are serious about limiting election spending, and it can be and should be limited, because in England, etc., hardly any money is spent in elections. It's only in India that this kind of, India and US, etc., that this kind of huge spending on elections takes place. In most of Europe, virtually no funds are spent on elections by political parties or candidates. If we are serious about this, we have to put a limit on spending by political parties, and not only that, Today individual candidates are spending 100 times their limit. If their limit is 75 lakhs, some of them are spending 75 crores. And they spend it all in cash and they are not caught because they are spending it in cash. Now why, when Mr. Modi brought demonetization, he said we want a cashless economy. He said that we want all people to transact their business through banks. Now I can understand that ordinary people can't be made to transact all their business through banks, but at least candidates, political candidates and parties could have been made to spend all their money through banks. And if they had made just one law, one amendment saying that if any candidate or political party is caught spending money in cash, that will be a corrupt practice for which they will be disqualified. If that amendment had come, that could have stopped this kind of cash spending in elections to a very large extent. But this was also not done. Then we need, you see, to make the level playing field, we need state funding of elections. State funding means that candidates are given, say, 50 rupees per vote, depending upon the number of votes that they get in elections from the government. Now some people say that no, this is, so a candidate who gets 1 lakh votes will be given 50 lakh rupees from the government. So that even poor candidates who don't have even 50 lakh rupees can contest elections by borrowing money and pay back after the elections. But government says no, this is not feasible, this is too expensive. How is it too expensive? 50 rupees, total 60 crore votes are cast in a general election. If you pay 50 rupees per vote by way of state funding, it comes to 3,000 crores. 3,000 crores is not a large sum of money for the whole country. More than 3,000 crores is spent every year by way of MP lads funds, etc. So if we are serious about electoral and political funding reforms, we have got rid of electoral bonds, we have to put a limit on spending by political parties, we have to completely ban cash spending by political parties and candidates, we have to have state funding of elections, and we need to have proportional representation. Because see, today elections have become a money game, and the reason is people don't vote for the candidate or the party that they consider best if they feel that that candidate or party is not likely to win, because they don't want to waste their vote. So therefore they see which are the political parties or candidates who have some chance of winning, and they choose the less bad amongst those. And how do they form the perception who has some chance of winning? That perception is formed only on the basis of the visibility of the parties or those candidates. And visibility is purchased by money, because visibility is a function of how much advertising you do, how many of your political workers, paid political workers, go around distributing handbills, posters, etc. And even large rallies are organized by paying money to contractors. All right, we'll pay you 50 lakhs, you bring 50 bus loads of people, etc. This is how rallies are organized today. So therefore, if we want to reduce the influence of money in our politics, we need very serious electoral reforms, including proportional representation. In proportional representation, if a political party gets 2% vote, they will at least get 2% seats. So therefore we need all these reforms: proportional representation, state funding of elections, limits on political party spending, banning of cash, etc. But unfortunately, neither this government nor governments which have been coming in the past are serious about any of these electoral reforms. And therefore, we as citizens will have to raise our voices for these reforms, for them to feel any pressure to bring about these reforms. Thank you very much.